Man, I gotta tell you, something really interesting is brewing with this team right now, and I feel like not everyone is fully seeing the bigger picture yet. Like, on the surface, everything looks calm, nothing too crazy happening, but behind the scenes, there's a strategy coming together that could seriously shape what this team looks like for the next few years. And honestly, it all comes down to what they decide to do next. But before I tell you everything, click the like button and write in the comments. Go Vikings! Something is quietly taking shape behind the scenes in Minnesota. And if you're not paying close attention, you might completely miss just how calculated this entire strategy has become heading into the 2026 NFL Draft. Because while most teams are scrambling to patch holes, reacting to weaknesses, and chasing needs, the Vikings are doing the exact opposite. And that changes everything. According to Ian Rappaport, speaking alongside Rob Brzezinski, the Vikings have once again positioned themselves with a very clear objective: build through free agency so that when draft night arrives, they are free to take the best player available. No desperation, no reaching, just pure value. And when you really take a step back and look at this roster as a whole, not narratives, not hype, just the actual roster, it's hard to argue against that philosophy. Even after some departures, even after some players didn't take the leap many expected last season, this is still a team that sits comfortably in that top-tier conversation across the league. Maybe not top 5 like some believed a year ago, but still firmly inside that top 10 range. And when you're operating from that position of strength, the draft becomes a weapon instead of a necessity. Now, let's talk about why this matters, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Because there are areas where upgrades make sense, not urgent, but important. Take the defensive tackle room. Jalen Redmond has quietly become one of the most underrated players in the entire NFL. Dominant, disruptive, and consistently impactful. But next to him, that's where questions start to emerge. Levi Drake Rodriguez showed development, sure, but is that enough if this defense wants to stay elite? And then you look at the edge group, and suddenly it's a completely different story. Loaded, deep, explosive. The emergence of Dallas Turner in the second half of the season completely shifted the narrative around that unit. Early doubts, comparisons to Jared Verse. Those conversations look very different now. Same production, but Turner is still just 22 years old. That's upside you don't walk away from. At linebacker, the situation becomes more about depth. Blake Cashman continues to prove his value. Eric Wilson brings a unique blitzing presence. But durability has been a concern. And in a long NFL season, depth isn't optional. It's survival. The secondary, though, that's where things start to get really interesting. The addition of James Pierre may have flown under the radar, but internally, this is viewed as a high-value move. A player who graded as one of the top cover corners last season, now stepping into a system under Brian Flores that demands versatility and intelligence. But even with that addition, questions remain, especially at safety. Harrison Smith's future is still uncertain. And beyond Theo Jackson and Jay Ward, there's a noticeable lack of true depth at the position. Yes, Josh Metellus brings versatility, but he's not a traditional safety. And that is exactly where this entire Dylan Thiemann conversation begins to make sense. Because everywhere you look, ESPN, CBS, Fox Sports, it's the same projection, the same name, the same fit. Dylan Thiemann to the Vikings at pick 18. And yet, Vikings fans are starting to hesitate. There's a growing sense of fatigue, a feeling of, not this again. But here's the reality. Sometimes the most obvious move is obvious for a reason. Tiemann checks every single box this defense values. Versatility? He has it. Speed? Elite. A 4.35 in the 40-yard dash. Explosiveness? A 1.52 10-yard split that jumps off the page. Athletic profile? Off the charts. But beyond the numbers, it's the mindset. There's a quote circulating from Dane Brugler that perfectly captures who Tiemann is. If you told him eating Japanese snapping beetles would make him better, he'd already have them ordered. That's not just work ethic. That's obsession. And in a Brian Flores defense, that matters. Now, yes, there are concerns. He's slightly undersized at 6 feet tall. There are moments on tape where his run defense raises questions, including getting overpowered in key situations. But here's the key. Those are fixable issues. What you can't teach is his range, his instincts in coverage, and his ability to play multiple roles depending on the scheme. At Purdue, he thrived as a single high safety, covering ground sideline to sideline. At Oregon, he showed he could adapt, take on different responsibilities, and still produce at a high level. That adaptability? That's exactly what this defense demands. And when you connect all the dots, the roster construction, the lack of urgency at most positions, the need for a versatile safety, and the philosophy of drafting the best player available, it all starts pointing in one direction. This might not just be a popular mock draft pick. It might be the right one. But here's the question I want to leave with you. Are Vikings fans overthinking this? Or is there a legitimate reason to be cautious about Dylan Tiemann at pick 18? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Because what happens next in this draft could define the future of this defense. And here's where things get even more interesting. Because if you think this entire conversation is just about one prospect, one position, or one pick, you're missing the bigger picture of what the Minnesota Vikings are building right now. This is about control. This is about entering one of the most unpredictable nights in the NFL calendar, the draft, with more flexibility than almost any other contender in the league. Because think about it. When was the last time you could realistically say the Vikings didn't have to draft for need? They've addressed key areas in free agency, not with flashy, headline-grabbing moves like the previous offseason, where over $200 million was spent to completely reshape the trenches, but with calculated, efficient decisions that strengthened the roster without locking them into anything. That's a completely different approach. Instead of chasing stars, they've built stability. And that's why deals like the one for Kyler Murray at $13 million stand out. Not because of the name alone, but because of the value attached to it. That's a bargain in today's market. The same goes for bringing in James Pierre on a 2-year, $8 million deal. Low risk, high upside, and most importantly, it keeps options open. And that word, options, is everything right now. Because while fans are locked into this Dylan Tiemann conversation, the Vikings front office doesn't have to be. They can pivot. They can adjust. They can let the board fall to them and capitalize on whatever chaos unfolds in the first 17 picks. And that's where this becomes dangerous. In a good way. Because imagine this scenario for a second. A top-tier defensive tackle unexpectedly falls. An elite corner slips out of the top 15. A wide receiver with WR1 upside is suddenly sitting there at 18. The Vikings don't panic. They don't hesitate. They strike. That's what being in this position allows you to do. Now, does that mean Dylan Tiemann isn't the pick? Not at all. In fact, everything we've discussed still points to him being one of the cleanest fits on this roster. A player who fills a subtle but important need, while also aligning perfectly with the identity Brian Flores has built on defense. But what it does mean is that the Vikings are not boxed in. And that's something a lot of fans might be underestimating right now. Because draft fatigue is real. Seeing the same name over and over again in mock drafts can make any fan base start to question things. It creates doubt. It creates resistance. It makes people want something different, even if the original idea made perfect sense. And that's exactly what's happening with Tiemann. A few months ago, he was being projected in that 25 to 45 range. Then the combine happened, and everything changed. His testing numbers forced people to reevaluate him, forced teams to look closer, and now he's firmly in that top 20 conversation. But instead of embracing that rise, some fans are pushing back against it. And here's the truth. That reaction has nothing to do with the player. It's about repetition. It's about seeing the same storyline play out over and over again until it starts to feel predictable. But predictable doesn't mean wrong. Because when you go back to the tape, when you evaluate the traits, when you understand the role he would play in this defense, it still lines up. The versatility, the range, the ability to disguise coverages and move across formations, the discipline in coverage. These are not small details. These are core requirements in Flores' system. And yes, there are areas to improve. Run support will need to get better. Strength at the point of attack will be tested at the next level. But those are developmental aspects, not limitations. And for a team that isn't asking a rookie to come in and carry the defense from day one, that's a perfect scenario. Let him grow. Let him adapt. Let him become another piece in what is already shaping up to be one of the most complete defensive units in the league. Because make no mistake about it, this defense isn't rebuilding, it's evolving. After finishing as one of the top units last season, there's no expectation of regression internally. The belief is consistency, execution, and if anything, improvement through depth and versatility. That's the goal. And that brings us back to where we started. This isn't just about who the Vikings pick. It's about how they've positioned themselves to make that decision. No pressure, no desperation, just opportunity. And that's why this upcoming draft could be one of the most important turning points for this franchise in recent years. Not because they need to fix something broken, but because they have a chance to elevate something that's already working. So now I want to hear from you. If Dylan Tiemann is on the board at 18, are you making the pick? Or are you taking advantage of this flexibility and going in a completely different direction? And if you've made it this far, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay locked in. Because what happens next for the Minnesota Vikings is going to be something you won't want to miss. Go Vikings!